Hello to the curious and the thoughtful. It's Ellie. Great to see you. We're going to be talking about polling numbers today because I was watching a number of different channels, some on the right, some on the left, and I was noticing something that they were doing. And then I thought I'm going to take a look at the raw data and see what it has to say. And so I brought that data to you so that we can see what's really going on here. Okay, so we're talking about polling, and polling is more than just numbers. What polling is, it's a snapshot of how ordinary Americans are feeling. The latest surveys show something really striking in the sentiment of the American people. Approval ratings are shifting, motivation to vote is rising, and everyday concerns like housing and democracy are topping the list. But the media has an agenda. They give you the polling figure they want you to know. And they try to make it look like the poll is some kind of a prophecy of the future. Now, I have no skin in the game because I'm not in America. And you can hold that against me as much as you like. But I do live in a society just like America. And my society is influenced by the American society. So I'm here to stay. I have no direct skin in the game, but I do believe in the truth because knowing what's real leads to real empowerment. So I'm going to decode and help us to decode what today's polls really say about the mood of the country. And I'm going to show you how I've done it instead of just throwing up some numbers and saying, look, this is what the American people think. All right. So today we're going to be looking at 3 different polling sources, and I've chosen them really carefully. I've chosen them because they are as close to the full American collective as I can find, and they're long-standing, they're representative, and they're very well respected. Instead of looking at them separately, which is what the media does, they tend to cherry pick the figures that they like. I'm going to merge the 3 of them together, and then I'm going to tell you the average of what all 3 scores were in these kind of areas of importance that Americans are currently voting on in these polls. So let me qualify the sources first of all. The first polling source is Emerson College Polling that I'm going to be using. It's owned and operated by Emerson College. There's been no fact check issues against Emerson College in the past 5 years. It's run by students and they poll in a variety of different ways. They use telephone polling, in-person polling, and online social media polls as well. They're well known for being able to tap into the younger voter as well as other age demographics. Emerson College Polling does not use loaded words, which some of the other poll sources do, that are generally used to manipulate emotions or imply certain kinds of stereotypes in order to guide you into certain responses. Emerson polls are known to be very slightly left-leaning. So they're scored to have a left-leaning bias of 0.3%, which is quite tiny. The second one is the Pew Research Center. It's a not-for-profit research center, and it does a wide range of polling on every subject imaginable across the world. It actually uses a wide range of polling methods, and so it's able to reach a very broad demographic. It publishes very openly its methodology, which it leaves on its website so you can see how it has reached those figures. And it has a very long-standing reputation for rigor and broad issue coverage. It has never failed a fact check, and it's been in operation for 20 years. It has no bias score, so it's not considered to lean even a little bit left or even a little bit right. So it's very sort of center in terms of its delivery and methodology. And then to balance it out, I've gone with the Gallup poll as well. And Gallup is owned by an American global management consultancy. It's been operating since 1935, and it also has a diverse method of opinion polling around the world. It's largely political polling, but it does more political polling than the other 2, but it hasn't failed a fact check in 5 years as well, just like Emerson. And just to balance things out, it has a tiny right-leaning bias of 0.6%, which is still very, very small. Okay, so I've picked 3 really strong contenders, and I've tried to account for the little bit of bias by balancing them out. So I've got a little bit of everything, but even those biases are very negligible. So we're not just going to lean on one of these. We're going to merge all 3 together and look at the averages. And so we're looking at the collective pulse for all 3 polling sources. You generally won't see the media do this because what they do, they pick the score that they like. And I've seen this as recently as this morning. They pick the score that they like and they report on that score. And if they don't like the score, then they go to another polling agency or polling source and they look for something that they like and they pick that score. That's the reason why your big players like Fox News and its kind of opposite counterpart MSNBC are always showing you entirely different scores for things. It's because they're picking and choosing what they want you to see. So today's results might be interesting. They might even be unexpected. I guess we'll have to wait and see. So here are the key findings that I've averaged out. And I'm looking at presidential approval, motivation to vote, the top issues. And then I'm going into a little bit of detail there. When it comes to presidential approval, in this snapshot right now, and today it is the 14th of November, 2025. Okay. Approval for the president sits at 42%. Disapproval is at 50%. So now I'm going to compare what Fox News and MSNBC are saying. I've just chosen them as 2 opposites, even though MSNBC often gets its data from CNN and Fox News often, refers to other platforms as well. But I'm just using those 2 because those 2 have reported and I know what their figures are. So the 3 that I've averaged out shows approval sits at 42%, disapproval at 50%. Fox News is currently saying that Trump's approval is at 45%. But MSNBC on the very same day is saying that his approval is at 37%. Realistically, he's at 42%. So they have both cherry-picked the poll result they wanted to report. And the way that they did that is they went to the polling source that gave them the figure that they wanted. Okay. So the next issue is the motivation to vote. Now, according to the average of the 3 that I pulled up, roughly 57% of voters say that they're more motivated to vote than usual. And actually, this is the same as what's being reported by Fox News and by MSNBC. So they're agreeing with that. And Democrats are reporting the highest level of motivated energy to vote, which is understandable because it's always the underdog that is more motivated to vote. So whoever's in power tends to relax. Their team tends to relax, and those that want the power back, they tend to be very motivated. So this makes a lot of sense. Republicans, moderates and independents are obviously don't have the same score of motivation. But let's go back to Fox News and MSNBC again so that we can see how they're framing this. So both of them agree with the figures of around 57% are highly motivated, more than usual. And both of them say that Democratic voters are the most motivated right now. Fox News says that it's because it's political. MSNBC says it's because the voters are inspired by recent events, being some of the small elections that have taken place in the past week. So both outlets are framing it to gain the emotional response from their audiences. These are the top issues according to the average polls that I have drawn from Emerson, Pew and Gallup. The economy. Voters at 74% are motivated to vote based on the economy. Fox News is describing this as voter concern about inflation and energy prices. MSNBC is saying that the concerns relate to unmet promises by the administration and general affordability. So there's a bit of politics in there and slightly different priorities, but it's not too bad. They're generally just framing it slightly differently, and they're not arguing about the figure. So 74% is about the economy. 60% is about threats to democracy. Now, Fox News is framing this as an election integrity concern and kind of underplays the democracy factor. MSNBC, on the other hand, is saying that voters are extremely anxious about creeping authoritarianism. So even though they agree on the figure of 60% in terms of priority, voter priority, they're looking at it very, very differently and expressing it in a very different way to their audience. The next figure is 58%, which relates to immigration. So immigration is almost sitting neck and neck with threat to democracy. And Fox News is describing the 58% motivation relating to immigration as being a Republican priority, in a very similar way to how MSNBC is saying that voters are worried about authoritarianism as a priority. So can you see it's a similar weight, but it's on a different matter. MSNBC, when it comes to immigration, is referring to it as Trump's agenda of immigration and underplays it as a secondary thing to economic anxiety. So once again, you'll notice that the scores of 60% for democracy and 58% for immigration are very similar, the numbers. So basically, it's all about how it's leaning. So the next figure was housing affordability, which rated at 56% of voters considered it to be a voting priority. Fox News linked it to various local races as a pocketbook issue. MSNBC also did the same thing and linked it to various local races as a similar kind of pocketbook issue. They pointed to different states or different cities. However, housing affordability, the figure that was reported had nothing to do with local races. It was a national figure, and it linked to things like mortgage rates, federal tax credits, subsidies, national infrastructure, and housing programs that all tend to mostly be influenced by federal policy. The poll results were a national figure, so framing it to some local political race isn't relevant to the actual figure. So in both cases, both Fox News and MSNBC were falsely pointing to the fact that people were voting in a certain way or had pocketbook issues relating to a certain local race or state election, even though the figure is national. So it could be that the housing affordability issue was very low in some voter areas and extremely high in other voter areas, and it averaged out to 56%. And then, of course, the last thing that I'm looking at here is priority when it comes to abortion, which was at 45% in the average poll. Fox News hasn't really mentioned it much because of the recent Supreme Court ruling, but MSNBC caters to the underdog audience now that is trying to get it back, trying to get abortion rights back, and so they emphasized it as being a high motivator for voters. What this shows is that while both Fox News and MSNBC generally acknowledged the same figures as I did when it came to voting priorities, they leaned heavily into the interpretation that works best for their audiences. In reality, what the polls actually showed was that the highest priority for voters is the price of living across the board. Left and right both have other issues that play them against each other. So the left is voting for democracy, the right is voting for immigration, and it's almost neck and neck. It's very, very close. The difference is only 2%. And the left also wants to regain something that it has lost, which is abortion rights. Plus, Donald Trump's approval is still sitting, and this may not be popular with some people. Regardless of what you see in individual polls, the average is that Donald Trump's approval rating is still sitting in the same percentage point range as it did in his first term. His average approval between 2017 and 2020 was 42%, and his average disapproval was 53%. I've checked the average figures since he took office in the second term, since January 2025, and it's hovered. His disapproval has hovered between 53 and 57%, despite federal job cuts, foreign policy concerns, active litigations, investigations, and things like the Epstein kind of scandal, and whatever else has cropped up, minus the shutdown. The shutdown did have an impact. But minus the shutdown, all of the other things that we're hearing in the news are not really affecting his polling numbers. He's still sitting at an average of 42%, even if certain media outlets cherry pick it higher or cherry pick it lower. What these numbers show us is that ordinary Americans are not focused on how they feel about Donald Trump or any other politician, or any of the issues that are cropping in and out of the news and going around and around. They're focused on survival and stability. Things like jobs and homes and the health of the country. Fox News is leaning into this archetypal story of stability and strength as being a positive. And MSNBC is leaning into the archetypal story of chaos and instability as being a weakness. And their audiences are forming beliefs in accordance with whichever forum they're watching. So if they're leaning into the Fox Newsy side of the story, then they're looking at the country as something that's getting stronger. And if they're looking at the MSNBC-ish kind of side of the story, then they're seeing the country as being something that's getting more and more chaotic and weaker. So what is the moral of today's show? I guess the moral is that polls aren't predictions, they're just reflections, and they show us where people's anxieties and hopes are right now. And there is anxiety and hope in the polls that we're only hearing one side of, depending on where we go. The poll doesn't guarantee any outcomes, and the numbers can shift dramatically overnight. The shutdown is an example of that. Carl Jung would say that the numbers demonstrate the archetypal mirrors of the human consciousness. On one side, the collective has a fear of chaos and collapse, and on the other side, the collective has a hope of order and renewal. But neither of those is the answer by itself. It's just the way that the media attempts to translate the collective mindset and present it as a truth. In reality, these polls have shown us how the collective shadow of America is emerging in the polls. But what it doesn't show us is how to integrate the shadow that's appearing on either side of the spectrum and bring it together to make the country whole. The numbers might reveal the shadows that exist, but only the choices that we make can reveal the future. And the choice is, of course, the vote. If this video spoke to you, there's plenty more where it came from in this playlist. Welcome to the new world. This is Ellie Dreams and Under. I love knowing you're here, and I'll see you in my dreams. Bye.